So next, we're going to pick up with the gland. Dragons have voracious appetites, and this is why. So the thyroid gland is located at the base of your throat, right above your collarbone, right on either side of your trachea. So when we're going to be talking about some of the things that you can do to support the thyroid, you can actually apply them right over the skin above the thyroid gland right there. So the thyroid gland produces a couple different hormones. The main ones are T3 and T4, so thyroxine and triiodothyronine. And they are vitally important for metabolic function and metabolism. And the thyroid gland works directly with the pituitary gland, so they're kind of a tag team and they need each other to work properly. So the pituitary gland signals the thyroid to produce T3 and T4, and that is usually measured through a TSH level blood test. And so oftentimes you'll go into the doctor and they will test you for your thyroid and whether it's normal or not by measuring your TSH levels, and that is telling them whether or not the pituitary is signaling the thyroid in the right range. If it's too high, that means the pituitary is signaling the thyroid too much, and that means the thyroid is not producing enough for its needs. Or if the TSH levels are extremely low, that means the thyroid is producing more than what the pituitary is actually wanting it to. And so oftentimes, it's kind of a real quick snapshot of the thyroid, but it can be also very misleading because the thyroid might be producing what it should be producing, but the pituitary is not working correctly, or it's pinging it too often and telling it to make more than what it needs, or vice versa. And so we'll talk a little bit about testing the thyroid gland and making sure that it's actually part of the problem and not just trying to compensate for the pituitary or some other part of the endocrine system. So the thyroid gland regulates metabolism. It regulates your hunger, and metabolism can affect your weight in either gains or losses. And so if your thyroid is not functioning properly, if it's sluggish, you're constantly going to be hungry no matter what you eat. And you're going to be putting on weight because your body really doesn't need that much food, but your thyroid is saying that you do, and so that can kick in those hunger pangs that you're feeling. And if your thyroid is operating too heavily and producing too much thyroid hormone, then you can eat, and never gain any weight, and you're really going to start taxing your body by one, digesting all that food, and two, never really getting the nourishment that you truly need from all the food you're eating. So when the thyroid gland malfunctions, it often comes out in chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's because the thyroid really works hand in hand with the adrenals. And so when the adrenals get heavily taxed, you can suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome, where you just never feel like you ever get enough rest. So like I said, there's two ways that the thyroid can function, either too much or too little. The main one that most people suffer with is the hypothyroidism, where the thyroid is sluggish or not making enough thyroid hormone for the body's needs. And this is what we see most often with women. So you're going to experience things like fatigue or extreme lethargy coming out of that as that chronic fatigue syndrome. You're going to suffer from weakness, weight gain, or the inability to lose weight, coarse, dry hair, brittle nails, and rough, dry skin. It's just no matter how much water you drink or lotion you put on, you just always feel like this dried out piece of leather. You also will suffer from hair loss, so even your eyebrows are going to be affected. I know when I was really suffering from hypothyroidism, I lost half of my eyebrows from the outside in, and I had to pencil them in so that I wouldn't look like a weirdo. But treating your thyroid can help you have nice, thick, luscious hair and really nice, thick eyebrows, and that's what gives you that young look that women want. You can also suffer from cold intolerance, muscle cramps, muscle aches, and restless leg syndrome. I suffered heavily from restless leg syndrome, and I would have to take tons and tons and tons of magnesium just to be able to not have that crazy leg feeling that I would get. And I have, through my study, I have found the correlation between hypothyroidism and the body's ability to assimilate magnesium efficiently from the foods that we eat. So you often see that quite a bit in people that suffer from thyroid issues. You can also have constipation, and sometimes it can be diarrhea, and it can just go back and forth, sometimes in the same day, sometimes in the same few hours. The body is really trying to regulate its metabolic function, and this can really put kind of a kink in the system. So, something to watch for. You can be extremely irritable. When you're extremely tired, little things can kind of set you off. You can suffer from memory loss, what I call the Teflon brain. Like nothing sticks. Somebody can tell you something 2 seconds later, you didn't even remember that you had the conversation. You can suffer from decreased libido, so not having any kind of sex drive. And if you're married, that's probably not going to be too desirable on your husband's list, or your list. So, and then also abnormal menstrual cycles. This can be lack of a period, too heavy of a period, too light of a period, not ovulating correctly, things like that. So a lot of times people will tell me, well, I went to the doctor and I got tested and they said my thyroid was fine and I was normal. So what is normal? So there's a couple different ways you can test the thyroid. You can test it through blood or saliva. Typically when you go into a traditional doctor's office, they are going to test you with a blood draw. And they send those labs off to a local lab that's going to test you. And you're going to be tested on this bell curve. And you're going to be tested against other people that are in your local population, which can be kind of a real inaccurate way to tell you whether you're normal or not. Because if your local population tends to not be very healthy, or they all suffer from a little bit of thyroid issues, then you're going to be evaluated on this curve of this group of people. So you're not really getting an accurate assessment of how well you're doing. You're just being compared to a lot of other people in your same demographic. And then with blood, you're also evaluated at one point in time. So if you went into your doctor's office in the morning, did you eat before you went? Did you not eat before you went? Did you get a good night's sleep the night before? All of those things play into your hormone balance. And different times of the day, we have different levels, and that is how it's supposed to be. So there are other tests that you can take that are more accurate, that give you a lot more data. And those are saliva tests. So it's usually a take-home test, and you swab the inside of your mouth like 4 times a day, and that can measure and give the health practitioner more data to work off of on what time of the day you took it, your eating before and after your sleep, and all that kind of stuff, to see whether or not your thyroid is really functioning at its optimum or not. And they're going to look for things like TSH, which is the chemical between the pituitary and the thyroid, the signaling hormone. They're also going to look for free T3 and free T4 and how they're converting. They're also going to look for, if they're really diligent, they're going to look for your cortisol levels and how the adrenals are being taxed or not based on what the thyroid's doing. So all these things are super important when you're wanting to get a great assessment of your thyroid. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here real quick before we get over 10 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and pick back up on how to jumpstart the thyroid and move on to the next system. So I'll see you back here in just a few.